What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And as you can tell, we've got a Grand Cherokee behind us today, and it is not a WJ. Now, if you've been on the channel for any amount of time, you know we've bought a few WJs, and to tally up my WJ ownership, I've personally saved 12 WJ Grand Cherokees from imminent death, from the salvage yard, from whatever you want to call it, broken, neglected, bought, purchased on Facebook Marketplace, or even found on the side of the road broken, and brought them home, saved them, put them back together, lifted them, made them look cool, and have found them new homes. And today marks the first ever third-gen Grand Cherokee, and as the title states, the worst Grand Cherokee ever. Now, hold on, guys. I'm sure some of you third-gen owners are going to be immediately down in the comments saying why the third gen is the best ever, but I'm gonna kind of explain why the third gen is the worst Jeep Grand Cherokee ever. And that's because I am a technician that has worked on these things, that has been in the shop, in the dealership since 2008. And boy, oh boy, did the third gen Grand Cherokees have a lot of issues. And by issues, I don't just mean, oh, they needed brakes and they had oil leaks, but electrical issues. With the introduction of the Jeep Grand Cherokee WK in 2005, it introduced an entirely new platform to the Grand Cherokee lineup. Away went the solid front axle that Jeep had always been known for, and in place, a independent front suspension. Now, yes, in the rear, we still have a solid rear axle, but the big, huge thing that the Jeep purists were unhappy about is that independent front suspension. Now, they did drive nice on the road because of that independent front suspension. They handled well. They did all the things very well for a more street-oriented vehicle, but that off-road prowess kind of went by the wayside a little bit with the independent suspension. Now, I have never personally thought I would own a WK, but this one was a lost Jeep that needed to find its way back on the road. Now, from the camera, this thing looks really, really nice, but I've already spent a ton of time cleaning this thing up, and I will show you guys some before pictures of this thing. Now, why was this thing left on the side of the road? This was a new Jeep at one point in its life, obviously, that was bought new here in Wichita, Kansas, but unfortunately made its way to New York for about 4 or 5 years. Now, the 4 or 5 years in New York were not kind to the underside of this Jeep. It does have a lot more scale or rust scale than any of our normal Wichita area Jeeps would have, but it does not have any nasty structural issues or anything like that. It's just way more rust, chunky, scaly, nasty than we'd normally see here in Kansas. And that's kind of what led the thing to be abandoned or left for dead back in 2018. The rust scale was enough to get to the engine oil pan and cause the engine oil pan to start leaking or seeping engine oil. These are not terribly fun to do oil pans on because you do have to drop the front axle, and it's just a little more time consuming. So again, this Jeep got parked in a driveway in 2018 and never touched again. The owner reached out to me and said, hey, I'm ready to get this thing out of my driveway. You know, what do I do with this thing? Do I just take it to the salvage yard? What do you think? Came over, looked at the Jeep, and from the outside appearance, other than our fender that is pretty badly smashed, it's in really good shape. The interior's in good shape. The paint work is in decent shape. Everything other than that front fender is really nice. Now, the thing did have a paint protection film put on it years and years ago, and it was absolutely destroyed. Again, I'll throw a picture up here. I spent probably 10 plus hours removing the paint protection film on the fender here and the hood. Again, this was left because we're gonna have to put a fender on this thing, but I had looked up salvage or scrap values for her just to give her a thought on what she would get if she took it to a salvage yard, and told her, hey, here's what the salvage yard would give you. I'll at least give you twice as much to hopefully save one and put it back on the road. And yeah, I ended up bringing it home. I threw a battery in the thing. I brought a bunch of engine oil with me to dump down the engine, and hopefully limp my way back home. I was very happy to see when I threw the battery in it, put engine oil in it, hit the key, the thing fired up. Now this thing is only showing 95,000 miles, which is pretty darn cool. That's a lot lower than any of my old WJs had when I have found them left for dead. Now, of course, the tires were all flat, so those were aired up, and I limped the thing home for the first time back on the road since 2018. Now, what I've already done to this thing to get it where it's at, like I talked about, I've already worked on the paint protection film here on the hood and passenger side fender, but of course, day one, I had to get an oil pan put on this thing. Now, I didn't show any of that. Now, I do have a picture of said oil pan and its crustiness. Like I said, it was seeping pretty decently under the thing. So it's got an oil pan put on it. The engine oil and filter obviously changed, and I have started working on that paint protection film there on the hood. But let's grab you guys, let's walk around this thing and see what we've got. So guys, like I said, it looks absolutely beautiful here on camera, but I can absolutely assure you the paint is super, super oxidized, and it feels like sandpaper. Again, I'm going to have to buff this thing very, very aggressively to get some shininess back into the paint. Again, the camera makes this thing look absolutely beautiful, but I can assure you it is very, very oxidized here in person. Now, our smashed front fender is obviously going to need to be replaced. I've got a fender already ordered and already sent off to paint, so we can get a fresh fender on this thing and make it look good. Now, if you notice, we've got a nice looking wheel up here, but it does not match the other wheels. Whatever happened poorly up here also obviously damaged the wheel, and the wheel was just replaced with a salvage wheel of some sort. But more to that New York rust and oxidation. Look at these poor wheels. Oh my goodness. I personally have not seen aluminum wheels this destroyed in my life before. It is pretty wild how bad those wheels are. But overall, this thing, again, I've ran the thing through the car wash and it does clean up pretty darn well. Again, here is another wheel here that is just absolutely destroyed. But guys, jumping into the interior, this thing was very nicely equipped. It is a leather heated seat, just really darn nice Jeep, and it's not torn up. It does need some pretty darn deep cleaning. The carpets are pretty dirty, but for the most part, it is really, really nice. Now, our driver's seat is probably gonna need a seat bottom cover, but again, it's just really, really nice condition for something that has sat for a really long time. So guys, let's get into why this is the worst Jeep in the world. We've talked about some of the lesser off-road worthy things about the WK platform, the independent front suspension. Again, in the dealership world, back in the day, these things were plagued with electrical issues. We had just multiple, issues with these things where they would have bus communication issues, and just every single light on the dash coming on for intermittent various weird things. They just were kind of a nightmare back in the day in the dealership setting. Now with this one, we are going to get into why this one is the worst. This one is equipped with the smallest engine or powertrain option. This is the 3.7 liter V6. Now again, we can also see some of that New York corrosion on all of these engine parts here. We've got a bunch of rust on the steel parts and a whole bunch of corrosion here on our aluminum parts. Now guys, with the WK platform, you actually had 5 different engine options over the years. Again, our worst case scenario here is the 3.7 liter V6. The next option would have been the 4.7 liter V8 that, if you've been on this channel for any amount of time, you've known we have taken a lot of those apart. Now the next step would have been the new at the time 5.7 liter Hemi, and these things do run really, really well with those Hemis in place. One step higher than the Hemi is the 6.1 liter SRT powered Hemi, and those obviously only came in the SRT flavor, and boy, are those really cool Jeeps. Now, last but not least, and at least here in the Kansas area is pretty darn rare, is the 3.0 diesel option that was available in the WK platform. They did run well, but boy, they were not fun working on those things just because we didn't have a whole lot of experience. There just wasn't that many that came into the dealership, and when they did, you always wanted to walk the other way. Now guys, I guess let me show you some of our New York corrosion here underneath. Now again, there's nothing structural, but there is just a lot more corrosion than I normally see here in the Kansas area. So guys, what's the plan with this thing? Now, like I already said, I've already worked on getting the paint or paint protection film cleaned up. I've already got the fender ordered and just took it to paint, so that should be a fresh fender here. I of course need to get headlights buffed. It's kind of the same story that I've done with all of the WJs on cleaning up years of neglect and sitting outside. Now also the same story is going to be what we do with suspension, wheels, and tires. These are luckily the same 5x5 bolt pattern that we find on WJs and correspondingly JK and JL Wrangler. So this of course is going to get lifted and Wrangler wheels and tires put on it like I do to every single Grand Cherokee that I save. It's just kind of my signature at this point. And if I see them out on the road, I can always point to it and go, hey, hey, that was one of mine, and I put it together. So I've already got a lift sitting in this thing ready to go. I've got wheels and tires sitting at the shop, so all I need to do is put them on. Now I'm probably just going to roll that into this video so you guys can just continue watching. I'm going to throw a quick time lapse of throwing one of the front parts on, one of the rear parts on, our wheels and tires, and then we'll hopefully have this thing looking a lot better. We won't have our fender back in a timely manner. That will be in a future video, but I'm kind of excited for my 3.7 liter, my worst Jeep Grand Cherokee ever produced. Now, I guess the only thing that could make it worse is the fact that a lot of WKs were optioned with two-wheel drive. So this could have been a two-wheel drive V6, and that would have been pretty unfortunate. But we've at least got our all-wheel drive here. And yeah, I'm gonna learn to love the 3.6 because honestly, in the last few days of driving this thing, it has really, really not been bad. Now, when we bolt bigger wheels and tires on it and we've got a lift, maybe that will be a different story. But like I said, guys, keep watching. We're gonna throw a lift on it and hopefully have this thing looking really, really good in a short amount of time. All right, guys, so here is our final finished product. No time lapse because of GoPro life, of course, but here is the final product. Like I said, we've got our small strut spacer up here above the factory suspension. And here we can see all of our New York life under this thing. Nothing structural, obviously, but just a lot more crust than we would normally see here in Kansas. We've got some fresh turned rotors and our 1-inch wheel spacers, which unfortunately are needed on a WK on 07 and up due to our redesigned brake caliper bracket. So 1-inch wheel spacers to make sure everything fits as it should. And then moving on to the back, again, all of our New York just corrosion and crust on this thing, but absolutely every single bolt came out with no issue. So it's all just nasty surface rust on this thing, and again, nothing actual structural into the hardware. So got our 1-inch wheel spacer, we've got our little rough country spacer up here above the spring, and we should be sitting pretty nice. So guys, this is now the second day for me, but the just continuation of the video here, but I am all lifted and wheels and tires on this thing, and I thought I would show you the results. Now we're back inside the garage because outside is now an absolute cold, rainy, windy day. That is not going to work very good for filming. So we're gonna be in the garage here. We're gonna quickly look it over and then get this thing, go out, drive it with our new lift and tires. So guys, it honestly looks really, really good. As you can see, we've got JK Wrangler sport wheels with some Rubicon Takeoff KM1 tires here with that 2-inch rough country lift. And man, this thing looks really, really good. I am super happy with how it came out. It looks kind of taller in the front with the fender gap versus the rear, but if you actually take a measuring tape to the body, it is very level to the ground. So just kind of a weird optical illusion here, but no, this thing looks really, really good. Now, cool thing about a 3rd gen Grand Cherokee is the front air dam has quick disconnect quarter turn fasteners, and you can remove that thing and all of a sudden have a whole lot more front ground clearance, and it makes it look 5 inches taller than what it did with that air dam on. Now, there is still an absolute ton of work to do on this thing. Like we talked about, our fender is still crunched and destroyed. That thing is out at paint. I've got headlights to buff, paint to buff, just all the things that I still need to do to this thing. But now I feel pretty cool driving this thing down the road with the lift and some proper wheels and tires that aren't absolutely destroyed from some horrible corrosion. So we're gonna go take a quick lap around the block in this thing. Now, again, this being the worst Grand Cherokee in the world, I'm being a little bit harsh, I understand, but one of the big things was the introduction with this 3rd generation Grand Cherokee was the fact you could have 4-wheel drive without 4-low, and that's exactly what we've got here. We've got the small engine, of course, the 3.7 liter V6, and we do have 4-wheel drive, but as you can see, we've got no lever, we've got no button, we've got no switch to switch this into 4-wheel drive low. So this is still going to do really well out on the road, out in the snow and ice, but you're not really going to be off-roading this thing like you would primarily think about off-roading in the Jeep world. Without the option to be able to put this in low range, you're going to be severely in a deficit off-road trying to crawl or climb things. Now, could you do light trail driving? Oh, sure, absolutely. It would do fine. But anywhere you're going to be needing to do any tall, aggressive climbs like we are often doing, at least here in the Kansas area, you are going to be really not able to do that. So that's another one of the reasons why these are the worst Grand Cherokees in the world. Like I talked about earlier, the electrical issues that these were kind of tainted with, at least in the dealership setting early on. We just had a whole bunch of them coming in with goofy, weird electrical issues. But it's honestly a nice driving vehicle. I drove it home from the shop and I was pleasantly surprised, even with the 3.7 and our now 32-inch tall mud terrains, it still moves really, really well going down the road. Again, this size, if you aren't familiar with the Rubicon JK size, is a 255/75 R17, and these are a LT tires. This 3.7 with the NAG 5-speed transmission really doesn't seem to care, of course, here in our relatively flat driving of Kansas. But yeah, I'm kind of excited to daily this thing for the next upcoming months until it's done, finished, and finds its new home, because it looks pretty darn cool. Once I don't have a crushed fender on that side, it will look even cooler. I'm not embarrassed to drive a 3rd gen lifted up looking cool. So guys, I've only put a couple 100 miles on this thing since getting it and getting it drug out of their driveway. So it'll be interesting to see what issues pop up from this thing all of a sudden being driven again down the road, and it having sit for so darn long. But other than that, the thing drives really nicely. Yes, it's not an absolute powerhouse, but it does move very respectably down the road for a V6 with some heavy wheels and tires on the thing. Handling is pretty decent. You do lose some caster when you lift lift these things, but it still drives and tracks very nicely down the road. Yeah, other than the howl from our mud terrains, which is unfortunately just a characteristic of big loud mud terrains, this thing is really nice driving. If you were to put a really nice set of all-terrains on this thing, it would be perfect. But the mud terrains do look very cool, so they're gonna obviously stick around. I was able to get a good deal on the wheels and tires on Facebook Marketplace like I normally do, and yeah, they look cool, so that's what it's all about in the Jeep world. So guys, let me know if you've ever owned a 3rd generation Grand Cherokee, or Commander for that matter. What engine was in it? What issues did you have? Did you love the thing? Did you hate the thing? And do you still have it? But yeah, I don't know if there'll be another video with the 3rd gen Grand or not, but I just always want to document me saving another Jeep and getting another one out on the road that's been parked and neglected and left for dead and was probably destined for the salvage yard. So I'm doing my part to save the Jeep community. I guess you guys need to get out there and do your part, but don't, because it's a lot of work and it's a pain and you spend a lot of money, but it's all about the Jeeps. So guys, thank you for coming along on our first 3rd gen WK Grand Cherokee adventure. And yeah, until next time guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.